How you doing, guys? Eric from RuleTheWasteland.com, repping the Florida Gators again, as usual. And today we're going to talk about multiple things that might be going boom over the next few months to years with at least one specific prediction on my part. But before we do that, we are going to, what's up, Utah Mike? We are going to go ahead and run through the Patreon giveaways really quick and the next prizes. It should take no more than 3 or 4 minutes, hopefully. So if you guys are watching this later, feel free to jump ahead a little bit. But yeah, so we got the Fox Edge knife, which is awesome, the Nux, and 25 extra entries. So let's go ahead and pull, and I found a workaround for removing the people from the field after they've been won. You have to enter in the numbers individually, so we went ahead and just created the list of numbers that I can cut and paste into the exclusion field to do it much quicker since you can't just type in a paper. But whatever, that's behind the scenes shit. We're going to share screen. You guys see this? So the first one up is the knife, Fox Edge knife. $50. So that looks like it is Niz. Niz. So, Niz, you got the Fox Edge knife. Congratulations. Put this down here. Next up will be the Nux. So we're going to share screen again. $83. Tennessee. Tennessee is 83. So Tennessee 83. Got the Nux. Well, last up. 25 free entries. One more time. The numbers should already be all removed. $11. That is Ed M. Ed M. You got the 25 free entries. For next month's prizes, which we will show you right now. Run through it quick. We got a Schrade Old Timer HS1 honing steel for stropping and honing your knives after the apocalypse. We have this is a Zorvum 2-piece ghillie suit, youth medium size. It is more like a bush rag suit. It's 2 pieces with camouflage material on the front and back, so it's not just for stalking like a true ghillie suit. It's more like a stalking suit, but it's made of this really lightweight mesh material with I don't think it's actual burlap. It's probably a synthetic fiber, but it's got the top, the pants, and the headrest. But it is like a U size. I tried to put this on, and I'm just too tall. But it's not way too small for me. So someone my frame who is like 5'7", 5'6", or under could really use that. Or you could certainly just chop this thing up and use it to camouflage weapons gear or add on to an existing, BDU top or something to make a pretty good different options. And the head thing fit fine on me as well. Or you could, if you just wanted a ghillie suit with just the back covered so you could do more stalking, you could definitely use this to cover it. And the third prize is this K-Bar 5351 IFB Trail Point knife, brand new. Pretty cool. So those are the 3 prizes for next time. Congratulations to Niz, Tennessee, and Ed M for this month. So now, 4 minutes. So like I said, didn't take too long. We can get into this month. How is everybody Likewise, there will be heck to pay for the Ukraine success. That is definitely one of the things that we're going to be talking about. I will put Ukraine in quotation marks there because we know damn well that this was the attack that he's talking about, which if you haven't heard, I'll get into, was at the very least perpetrated with significant NATO intelligence, money, and probably direct support and possibly construction of the drones and everything as well. And then simultaneously, we have what looks like to be complete meltdown in the international bond markets in multiple countries, which may be purposeful. And that's one of the reasons why I think there's going to be a big boom in the next few months to years, is because I think there's going to be a concerted effort to drive down bond yields before we have, and that might have already been what they were trying to do with some of these economic shenanigans, tariff stuff and whatnot, is I definitely think they will choose, not that they really have a choice, to sacrifice the markets and a lot of other economic stability to try to save the system in general. Because when you get to where you have, like we've already seen mainstream like Forbes type outlets come out and say there is a hard deadline somewhere in the 2050s, I think, that even if things don't get any worse, the exponential growth of the U.S. national debt and more importantly, the interest payments on the debt is going to reach a critical point at sometime in the 2050s where it just surpasses the entire budget and all our money is being spent on the debt load. And that's what a lot of people who try to make the argument like the debt doesn't matter. I mean, if you have outstanding debt that no one's bothered to call in and people will still allow you to borrow more money, then I guess you could say it doesn't matter to you, just like a household who is continuing to spend on credit cards. As long as you have an endless limit on those credit cards and you don't have to ever pay anything back, then it wouldn't matter. But what makes it matter is the payments that you have to make, the interest payments. Credit cards, it's like 30%. With the national debt, it's somewhere between 0 and approaching 5% now, even surpassing 5% for some of the longer term bonds. But even the 10-year yield, which is probably the most important for various reasons, I think it's the biggest chunk, is for closing in on 5%. So if they have to really roll over trillion, somewhere anywhere between 9 and like 11 or 15 even trillion dollars rolled over in new debt at now these what's pretty much double the interest rates, that adds a massive amount of money that we have to pay every year as a country just in the interest payments. That, as I've said in the last couple of podcasts, gives us nothing from a government that has the constitutional authority to coin money, to just create money by pure fiat, instead chooses to borrow it with interest from a private consortium of banks. And so then we end up with, and also they loan, they sell these bonds to just anyone who wants to buy them as well, which is just created by the Federal Reserve. But so all over the world, there's hedge funds, there's sovereign nations and entities, there's retirement funds and 401ks and all sorts of other just individuals and businesses who own U.S. debt. And so a lot of people I've seen on Twitter are saying things like, why can't you just default? Like, well, of course you can just default. Anyone can just say, I'm not going to pay my debts. But like it goes back to when we were talking with Shay and JJ and everything about the COVID, when we were first getting into COVID, the argument is not, can this happen? It's what does the country look like if this thing happens? Because yeah, sure, you could default, but what does the world look like if the U.S. just defaults on its debt? Some people seem to think that like, oh, now we just don't have to pay any more of these national interest payments, which I guess is true, and the outstanding debt would be gone. The closing in on $40 trillion that we owe, if you just said we're not paying that anymore, then sure, that's gone. But that's $40 trillion of assets on someone's balance sheet all across the world, many of them here in the U.S., many of them pension funds for police and firemen and teachers and private companies just wiped out. All sorts of national, China and Japan and other countries that have trillions of dollars in U.S. bonds, that would all disappear. They wouldn't be very happy. That would just be total instant economic collapse. And even more important than that, from a domestic standpoint of like what kind of options this give you, is who is going to borrow, or rather loan, more money to the US government in the immediate wake of them just immediately saying, well, we're not going to pay you back. And that means that you would have to immediately have, by necessity, you would have a balanced budget because you would no longer be able to. Remember, we're not just paying for interest payments, we also are borrowing to pay for a massive chunk of the federal budget, something like at least $1 trillion. Because even if you say a few hundred billion, closing in on a $500 billion or whatever it is just interest, there's still more than $1 trillion, and it's increasing all the time, especially with these new bills that they're trying to produce. There's still like $1 trillion plus that the government is spending that it's not taking in. And even assuming tax revenue stayed flat through this chaos, which is a joke, they would not, because tons of people's income and everything would be upset, and entire industries would be disrupted, and people's income would plummet, companies' income would plummet. So tax revenue would not stay the same. But even if it did, you would instantly only be able to have the money that you brought in taxes to spend for federal spending, because no one else is going to loan you money, at least for a few years after you just immediately defaulted. You can just go back to business as usual. So show me where you can, in addition to all the other craziness that would be happening in the world economically if this happened, show me where this $1 trillion in spending cuts would come from. It would have to either come from all the discretionary spending first, so either the military, but all the spending is, the vast majority of government spending is military, Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. And a lot of transfer payments would stop. So there'd be like riots and stuff, and it would just be an absolute mess. The US currency would probably be cooked instantly because of the total disintegration of the bond markets. That's not even getting into the fact that you can't really, just because of the structure of our currency, you can't really just pay off or default on it, because the currency is the debt. Currency is created as a unit of debt with an interest rate attached to it. So anytime you either pay off or default on this debt and eliminate the debt, you are destroying money. So there would be a massive deflationary spiral, as well as literal money would be disappearing. And so they will not do that. Absolutely cannot happen. Or, like I said, it's not that it can't happen. It would be so utterly catastrophic that it just does not give them any advantages in that scenario. So they're going to do what every single institution and nation in the history in this scenario has done, and they will just continue to debase the currency to give themselves a little more time until they're forced to do some sort of, which will, of course, in effect be a default, but it'll be more of a swap into a new system. And someone on Twitter pointed out, like, well, why wouldn't there be, like, there wasn't chaos necessarily when Nixon left the gold standard, and that was effectively a default. Sure, it was a default in the promise and basically in how the system was set up, but the key difference between them moving away from the gold standards the multiple times that they've done it is that because of the way that the US is and was, especially at that time, ensconced into the world economic system. It basically was and is in many ways the world economic system, aside from what BRICS is trying to do, having the reserve currency and everything. No one lost purchasing power instantly. No one said, they didn't come out and say these bonds that you bought are now worthless. You're not going to get paid your interest rate. You're not going to, and the face value of them is gone to zero. Because all they really said was you can't actually come get gold for this. They kind of admitted it. Admitted something that most people probably already knew. And if they didn't already know it, none of these institutions were actually planning on coming in at any point and getting gold for those notes. They were using them as an investment and an income instrument. And the percentage of people that were actually ever planning on hoping or trying to physically get gold in their hand for these was minuscule. So the fact that they removed that didn't really change anything, as long as everyone else still kept acting the same about US debt and US dollars, which was obviously the case. Everyone was like, no one was really worried that you wouldn't still be able to use US dollars anymore, because no one really was holding them because they could get gold. It was just what backed it initially, what made it, at least quasi sound money. But then once the system was entirely based on US dollars, for a short term, you didn't necessarily need it to be sound for other people to accept the dollar. So as long as other people are going to accept it, as long as you're getting your interest rate, no one came out and said, now that bond you have is worthless. And not only you're not going to get a return on your money, you're not even going to return of your initial capital. You're not even going to get a return of your investment, let alone on your investment. But that is what would happen if they came out and did a direct default, is that all these instruments that people hold would just instantly go to zero. So They're not going to do that. That would be the major difference. They're not going to do that. And now they're actually, you are seeing cracks in the confidence in the US dollar system, even to the point where Moody's has downgraded US debt, mostly symbolically, because to try and save some face for themselves, probably. Everyone knows what the situation is. So in that environment, it's a little different than just removing a technical element of the gold backed. It was only like 70% anyway. So they'd already gone through this process of removing the backing. So I think they're going to, I don't know exactly what they will try to do to drive yields down in the short term, but like I said, I'm going on record that we are going to see a significant market collapse slash correction before the end of 2026. Now, that may seem like a long time, year and a half, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not really, especially if you're planning on potentially buying. Like, this is not financial advice, it's just my opinion on what's going to happen. If you haven't already bought a house, those prices are probably going to go way down as well. If Warren Buffett, even though he's retired, his company's still sitting in cash. I think it would be an awkward time to get into the market with a large amount of money. If you're doing a dollar cost average thing, in my opinion, I wouldn't necessarily stop that as long as your income is steady, but it would probably be a good time to save up some kind of cash reserves. And of course, we know what the true beneficiary of currency death and economic destruction is going to be. Gold and silver, forged in the heart of a dying star. You know what I say? This is obviously going to be the standard commodities by which everything is judged. And that allows me to go into an interesting kind of side branch off, is that there are some people who view gold and silver as money in a either quasi-religious sense or even in an overtly religious sense, that it's the only real money. And I don't necessarily agree with that in principle. The principle is that money is required by humans to engage in any sort of economic system beyond just tribal level pure bartering. And there are certain elements that have properties that are best suited for that. Like, they have to be relatively rare, but common enough that it can be used for the whole system. It has to be, easily recognizable or verifiable. It has to be divisible. It has to be at least somewhat transportable, things like that. It has to have a long shelf life. It can't, corrode or degrade or something like that. And then it can't necessarily be like used up in the act of, like, people talk about bullets being used as currency, and no, they would be used for barter, but you can't use bullets as currency because they fail at least several of those points. But the main point about why, or how money is really used, is not actually for those properties, especially nowadays in modern times with electronic ledgers and electronic instant communications and shipping and stuff like that. What's actually more important is the price discovery mechanism that money provides. And what made me think of this is there was this island nation that had these giant stones that they would use as like a currency of sorts, as like a store of value, where the rich families would like transfer ownership of these giant like megalithic stones. So they were too huge to ever be moved. They would just stay there, but it was just kind of, understood, like, this person, like, we're going to sell part of this stone, or we own 30% now, and now this family owns it. And so you don't actually have to no one was taking the stone and using that in a transaction. They probably even weren't physically present at the stones to do it. The important thing that these stones provided was a price discovery mechanism. You could then take something that would be direct barter, but is no longer direct barter because you can articulate the value of these items individually, not just in relation to how you need it. So if someone had corn and someone had sheep, you might take the sheep even though you don't need sheep, because there is a universal standard, at least for your tribe out there, that these are worth 10% of a stone, and the corn is worth 9% of a stone. So it's basically a fair trade or whatever. And that gold and silver can provide that function too. And I definitely think that's the most important function of gold and silver. And it's also why we're never going to see a direct trading, and like the people who still talking about thinking that there's going to be some time where you're going down to the store and buying stuff with like a silver dime. It's never going to fucking happen. It's never going to happen. There's not enough of it. It would take a weird infrastructure. And you can't have a modern economy as we know it when physically transacting in the metals at every instance. It just wouldn't work. But you could go back to using golden system as the standard for price discovery, as in, but then you could just come up with some sort of currency that is able to be used. It could be digital currency, probably will be, unfortunately, at some point. And it could even be existing digital currencies like Bitcoin, whatever. It could be something new. It could be backed by other commodities, but you would potentially just use gold and silver as the actual price discovery mechanism, as in this is worth so many ounces of gold or so many ounces of silver. And you don't have to physically shave off a piece of gold and silver for that system to work like that. You just have to have representative. That's why we ended up with all these fiat currencies to begin with, is because it is so much more convenient and logistically streamlined of a system to not directly trade in the commodities. You just have to have a system based on sound money and intrinsic value for that to work long term, like actually sustainable long term, and to not steal from the population. And but that's why everyone has not used those systems, is because they want to. The governments and the institutions that control it don't want there to be truly sound money, because they can take advantage of unsound money. As the man says, give me a control of a nation's money and I don't care who makes its laws. That's how important it is to control the monetary system. But we're seeing the end result of unsound money, which is system collapse. And it's happening. I think it's going to happen in the next couple of years, at least in terms of the market specifically. Whether or not the currency drags on for a few more years before we see some sort of transfer to a new system, who knows? That will probably depend on how bad it gets. All right, so let's go through the comments. Will Ukraine start seeing the mushroom clouds? I mean, man, it's weird. We don't know for sure. Like I said, right after the threat of Trump saying there's all sorts of stuff that could happen that we've been holding back, that this big quote Ukrainian drone attack is unleashed. And for those of you who don't know, there was something like 40 Russian bombers, potentially a large percentage of their nuclear response fleet, was attacked in a massive drone strike that was planned out, from what I've seen, like a year in advance. Actually, pretty clever attack from what I've seen. They had these like prefab cabins, like if you buy a little steel building or metal building, and when you ship it around the country. So they had trucks that were shipping these around, and the drones were all like hid in the roofs of these things. And so so this was actually take place in Russia. This wasn't something that was launched from thousands of miles or thousands of kilometers away in Ukraine. They actually got these were deep locations deep inside Russia. I think in some instances up to 4,000 kilometers away from Ukraine. And so they just had these basically commercial trucks tracking around these little cabins or these buildings, and then all of a sudden the roof popped open and all the FPV drones flew out and blew up a huge billions of dollars worth of their airplanes. I've heard estimates from $2 up to $7 billion. So here, this is of course, consider the source. It's Kiev independent. So we don't know how much of we know that they lie to us. And that's not to say that Russia doesn't, but we know that Ukraine is full of shit. So take any of the information they give you with a grain of salt. But obviously this attack did take place. From Russia's information, they kind of just said there were some fire at some airfields and they now been put out and there's no casualties. Doesn't mean that a bunch of planes were not destroyed, though. So the Kiev perspective is an operation by Ukraine's security service using first-person drones smuggled deep inside Russia, hid inside trucks, has hit 41 Russian heavy bombers at 4 airfields across the country. It was codenamed Spiderweb. A year and a half in planning appears to have dealt a major blow to the aircraft Moscow uses to launch long-range missile attacks on Ukraine cities. So this is a big deal, very expensive, if not if capability-wise, damaging blow to Russia. And of course, this was perpetrated with extensive help from the U.S., with at least intelligence, probably money, or at least intelligence and money, probably other direct involvement as well. So it'll be interesting to see how Russia responds to that. Potentially pretty dangerous. All I got to say about that is, if you guys haven't got your Mira gas masks yet, I definitely think you need to. They're running a sale right now where you can get the CM8M full face respirator, which I don't think this one is the full CBRN, but if you're just talking about nuclear fallout, a lot of industrial stuff, it'll do what you need. It just won't protect against like full nerve gas and mustard gas. But in that case, unless you have the full suit, like Mod 5 gear, it doesn't matter anyway. So if you're just talking about hazardous fumes, smoke from wildfires, maybe different types of chemical, industrial accidents, full face respirator, they got it for, it's normally like 330, it's 199 right now. So you can get that and 3 filters for like 350. So I'll put the link to that here. Because as soon as anything, if there is any kind of nuclear detonation, you're not going to be able to get a gas mask for 6 months probably, and the price is going to triple. So if it's not something you have, I definitely would not buy another gun if you already have them or anything like that. If you already have 6 months to a year's worth of food, then even having more food, I think, doesn't really increase your chances of really making it better than having a gas mask. And these gas mask filters now can have anywhere from 10 to 20-year shelf life. The masks themselves are like 20+ years. The filters, I think, are 10 or 15 years at least. Or they're 20 years, they're saying, for if you get the SOF, the NBC 77. So the filter itself is still good for NBC stuff, but you're just the mask that's isn't necessarily for full CBRN. Yeah, potassium iodide tablets and all that stuff. But like I said, relatively inexpensive now compared to what it would be worth if something happens, and because like I said, if something goes off, there's already a little bit of wait for these and a pretty big demand because people all over the world are buying them. Might take you 4 to 6 weeks to get this if you order now. But if there's something goes off, you're not getting one. If you're lucky to find one, it'll be $1,000. Filters will be $100 each, easy, $150 maybe. So let's see what else we got. It'll be hell on steroids, but there's no more room to kick the can down the road. We're out of road. It seems like it's getting to that point, doesn't it? And how will the FDIC pay for the banks that fail? I mean, they'll pay for the same way that, like I said, that this isn't a question of will there be enough money? They'll just make more. The question is, what is that money going to be worth when you get it? So the FDIC will probably make good up to their guarantees, but it's going to be in dollars that don't have anywhere near the same purchasing power as when the banks failed. Jimmy says, why would FDIC pay off anything? The country's in crisis. Whoever sinks will sink. Whoever swims will swim. Yeah, I do think they will pay off, though, because like I said, those are the two choices, is to not pay off anything, to do the true default, or just to create more and more currency. The whole system is set up that that latter option makes more sense anyway, and especially given the just extremely drastic and instantaneous consequences that would occur if you just actually default. Money would disappear. You wouldn't even be able to pay police, firemen, military, politicians, everything. There's a reason why every country in history that has been faced with this dilemma has always gone the printing route. And so that's what they're going to do too. Yeah, we still probably will see things like Mark is saying, where Greece locked everyone out of a safety deposit box, different sorts of bail-ins and bailouts, and shut down and being able to pull cash from the banks and bank runs and all the other problems that go along with it. I just don't think there is going to be plenty of money. There's going to be too much, way too much. Now, in terms of actual physical cash, that will be severely hard to come by, and gold and silver will be. And I do still think crypto, barring cyber attack or the government cracking down in some ways, crypto will necessarily be a beneficiary of that as well. I think it would have to. I don't see how it wouldn't in an environment like that, because the liquidity will be such a problem when you own stocks and US dollars that aren't physically in your hand in cash. And so the crypto can provide liquidity. So I think that'll, in the short term, go up hugely in value and be used by a lot of people. Remember to the Greece, yeah, okay. So it says, Mark Olson says, in their only modern AWACS, and they lost their only modern AWACS. Yeah, they lost a lot of their bombers. Jimmy says, the problem I found with gas masks is getting quality, affordable NATO filters. Well, Mira has those filters and they're brand new too, and they're not, I would, like I've suggested before, if you want to go with a surplus gas mask, you can probably get away with it for most scenarios. I would not go with the old filters. Get new filters one way or another. Even if you have to go with an old mask, if it seals tight and you have a good suction, the filter is what's actually filtering. And like I said, most of us do not have the full MOP 5 gear to where we would be planning or able to withstand a true chemical or nerve gas attack. So the purpose of a gas mask is just to keep stuff out of our lungs and our eyes. So all you need from your mask is a good seal and no breaches anywhere, and make sure it's just pulling the air through the filter, and then the filter is what you want to spend your money on. And they're not particularly expensive. Like I said, they're about $50 if you get them in these packs for a true brand new 20-year shelf life Mira NBC filter. If you buy them, in these bulks, especially with the mask. So that's what I would focus on. Do you have a Grail water filter? Oh, sorry, I'm getting to answer in a second. If you want to suck on filters, Mira is a bit pricey. They are a bit pricey. There are cheaper options. I just would not go with anything that was old. So there's other companies, but they're all going to be not cheap. But I would go with a new filter. I wouldn't get old filters. Food production is the most important thing. Amazing, most ignore it. Resupply ain't coming, says Steve Hall. That's probably true. It's just another one of those things that's very difficult for most people. You have to really change your lifestyle to make a significant amount of food production in a way that's truly disconnected from the grid. And I've had this criticism before where I think a lot of people who produce their own food aren't really doing it totally free of grid controls. They have a lot of inputs into that system that they're getting from either the grid, from the store, from shopping. You know what I mean? Like if you're talking about a homestead that is growing all the greens and grains that they're using to feed their chickens and their cows, well, maybe not the cows, but the sheep or and everything, you're still usually buying like antibiotics or different types of equipment and gear occasionally. So yeah, you're a little bit more disconnected, and you can absorb a lot more scenarios than someone who is just in an apartment downtown, who has 72 hours of food. But you're still pretty vulnerable, and you have to know exactly what those vulnerabilities are, plans to adjust for no resupply. So I would just carefully evaluate that system. And certainly several years worth of food stored up is still going to serve you pretty well. And I wouldn't neglect that just because you produce your own food either. I would store food for yourself, store the supplies for your animals. So it gives you a lot more fragility in your system, but it does mean that there's certain things that you can weather that other people can't if you do have pretty much any level of food production. Yeah, like Jimmy says, food production is a prepper holy grail. Unfortunately, not everyone is born on or inherits a farm. It's not exactly cheap to buy a farm. And yeah, like I said, even if you have the money, it takes a complete lifestyle change. You normally have to move. You normally have to continue being able to make your money in that location. You have to be ready to defend that location, all that stuff. So it's not just like start making your own food. And if you're talking about you've got some mini homestead and you're producing a couple thousand calories a year, is that really better than just another bucket of rice? It just depends. The charcoal mop suits really only last 24 hours max. Yeah, I mean it's a pretty big ask to be able to want to withstand a true NBC attack of some kind, which is why I don't think it's necessarily something that most preppers should strive for, because it's just unrealistic and it's unlikely for most areas. Do you have a Grail water filter? Thoughts? I do not have a Grail water filter. I looked into them pretty extensively. I wanted to get a water filter that I could use for like taking to the airport and in a lot of types of civilian situations, that I could just filter the water because it's such ass. The water at the airport tastes like water. It tastes like you're drinking from the lazy river at Wet and Wild. It's like so overly chlorinated, it would literally make me sick. Not to mention all the fluoride, microplastics, and all the other bullshit. And the Grail was one of the ones that I looked at, which is also probably the Grail I would definitely go with for like bug out bag type scenarios. The difference was it has a filter that you fill up the container and then you push I believe it's ceramic filter in like down in, and it filters all the water at once, and then you can drink normally, which I may go with that one in the future still. So that's the downside, is you have to like do this filtration process with the multiple parts, in the airport or something like that, in the bathroom or by the thing. Might be a little weird, might be a little messy. The advantages are then that it's you can drink normally. The other one that I got that was called Pure Filter or Clear Filter or something like that. It's a membrane filter or I think it might be ceramic still, I'm not sure. They both are good at filtering, but that one you just fill the water bottle and then it's like a straw filter. So the benefits of that are you just fill it up anywhere you fill the bottle and you're good to go. You don't have to do this weird thing with pushing it down, but you do have to force the water through the filter, so you have to like suckle on it, and it's like a thick milkshake basically. It's not really hard, but it does limit the amount of water that I find myself drinking because It's not as simply as easy as just chugging it like you would normally. So it's fine for the airport and for like civilian stuff like that. We can just fill up in a sink or a water fountain, and it's not weird. You don't have to push the thing in. But overall, I would say that the grill seems like a better system, and I would get that for like bug out bag type things. But it might be awkward to do if you wanted to like fill your thing up in a gas station or an airport or a hotel or whatever. But they seem legit too. Kevin Brown says, yesterday I traded some electric digital numbers for brand new mirror gas mask on its way. Hell yeah, man. Good get. Steve Hall says, crypto especially depends on location. Here in rural Appalachia, the old guys that control food and energy are going straight to junk silver. Yeah, it's possible. Like I said, it depends on the scenario. And like I said, this isn't necessarily just about your local. We're talking about like a global shift in the monetary system. And I'm not just talking about what you're going to do to buy your next tank of gas, your next meal. This is also for what everyone else in the world is going to be doing to move around their billions and trillions of dollars in hedge funds and retirement accounts and 401ks and their brokerage accounts and their personal bank accounts and everything. So that is more like what I was referencing with crypto is that you don't necessarily need it for anything, and it might be hard to use in a lot of locations for directly purchasing stuff. But I do think a lot of people are going to jump into it as a source of somewhere to put their US dollars into that they can at least have some liquidity and at least save some of their purchasing power. Because gold and silver, when we see true currency collapse, it's people joke about unobtainium. It's just there just will not be any gold and silver. The gold and silver markets for physical are so small and they're slow too, comparatively speaking. Um, the local coin shops will be emptied out in a day. APMEX will be sold out in a day. Everything's going to be gone in 24 hours with these orders been placed. And then there just won't be any more physical gold and silver. And all the people who bought it will not be selling it. Um, Even the miners might just sit on it for a few weeks as they watch the prices go up and up and up and not actually dumping it into the market. So that'll just be gone. And all this demand for safety and liquidity and everything will have to go somewhere. So it'll go into foreign currencies sometimes, but so many of those are just derivatives of the dollar in various ways and based on the whole fiat system to begin with. So I think crypto will definitely be a beneficiary of that, at least in the short term. I think then we could initially see money really quickly leave crypto too after a period of time, so it could be dangerous. But I definitely think we'll see some huge spikes in the major cryptos. I read that. SBQR, what's up, sir? Says 95% of homesteads would collapse if they couldn't pick up their feed and fertilizer from the store. Exactly. And most people are doing weekly, or monthly, if not weekly trips of stuff like fertilizer, of stuff like feed, stuff like dewormers and antibiotics and the occasional, fencing or post or just gas for their generators and their tractors and tractor parts. And there's a lot of complexity that you're adding to a system to have a full-on homestead. And that's not to say that it's a bad idea. I think it's a fantastic idea. But I don't think most people's setups really give them that separation from the system that they think it is. And just because you're rural, that stuff's all going to disappear instantly too if people try to start producing their own food. So it's a great idea, but just be mindful of what your bottlenecks are in that system. I would say as a exercise/challenge, anyone who has what they consider a significant homestead operation, to start from tomorrow, let's say tonight at midnight, mark down everything you are requiring of the system. Every time you flip a light switch, say, is that juice coming from the grid or am I fully off grid with power? Every time you look up a piece of information like, oh, what do I do with my chicken that has an impacted crop or my broody hen, or, oh, I've got to buy some Epsom salt because they're egg bound or whatever. Would you even have that information without the grid? Every time you go to buy a bag of chicken feed or, like I said, antibiotics, or communicate with a vet or communicate with someone to trade for that food or use it or anything. When you go to cook the food, like every step of the way, start jotting down for at least a week, probably more like a month would give you a better picture of where these interactions with the grid are happening and with the normal system, whether that's communication, energy, commerce/resource purchases, whatever. And even when you purchase it, are you using credit card or using physical cash you have? Are you already using gold and silver? Are these people even capable of taking physical cash or gold and silver? Or is their operation capable of maintaining throughout this stuff? So There's going to be a lot of bottlenecks you didn't necessarily think of. Real News Channel says America used to have a civil defense program with public fallout shelters in almost every town and city. Survival food, water, medicine, radio, you're on your own now. Yeah, the government is definitely not going to be doing nearly as much to help us. I honestly think we've already seen that they've already chosen the leech and mooch class over the productive Americans to begin with. And we also know as a concept, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So all these resources are going, to the extent that there will even be any, will go to placate the angry mobs, the welfare mobs in the big city, people who are, already relying on the government in every aspect of their lives are going to go feral overnight, more feral. And we've look at how they've, treated the people from in Tennessee and North Carolina and everywhere else who were devastated, but they completely ignored because they're just rural, white America that no one cares. Government doesn't support that. All my fertility is produced here. Grow my medicine. Admittedly, I'm still working on animal feed. Yeah, I would for animal feed. And like I said, it's unrealistic to be completely self-sufficient. You would need a pretty big community, like Amish level, entire community dedicated to that. But you can get to where you can patch over supply chain disruptions, and that's what I think you should focus on. So, like, look at plants that grow indigenously in your area that are like, yeah, it's going to be hard to grow corn, big fields of corn and wheat and everything to feed your chickens, but you can do a bunch of ground cover or random trees and stuff that produce some sort of fruit or gourd or leafy green, like purslane and clover and all this other stuff that you could, chickens can eat that stuff too. I'm huge on the vermicomposting, worm bins and black soldier fly larvae that you can actually just give all sorts of scraps or like there'll still be trash, throughout all this, and you'll be able to get people's waste, maybe even animal waste and human manure even to grow different types of grubs, and it's just different options for patching over. And that's what I would be planning, like whatever you have, like I said, these bottlenecks, try to have a backup for that you could fill in if this ends, whatever it is that you're getting ends for same as you would for yourself, 30, 60, 90 days, 2 years, whatever. As Jimmy says, yeah, you really have to become a medieval farmer to be self-sustained. Right. And keep in mind that a lot of these, they dealt with a lot of problems that we fix now. Like I mentioned several times now, stuff like the antibiotics and stuff like parasites. Back then, they just had their sheep would just have the parasites. They would just have a lot higher of a mortality rate for their flock. You would need to have a larger flock. Someone will just die from some fucking parasite. You would probably have some fucking parasite. So you can exist like that, but it's just not in the lifestyle to which you have become accustomed. Jimbo said, is that a nuclear mushroom cloud lamp in the background? It sure is. I got the thing a while ago and I love it. I have the Taylor and Life Straws in my various bags. Good stuff. I think those little filters are great to have around. And like I said, my goal / my kind of theory behind prepping is not to be able to exist completely free of modern society off the grid. I think to the extent that which you can do that in any and every way possible is just added benefit, added force multiplier. But I think if you're really anticipating a complete widespread grid down event, then you need to just completely change your lifestyle, probably change where you live, become, like he says, become a medieval subsistence farmer or join an Amish community or leave the country to a country that you don't think will suffer from this necessarily at the same time. Quick tip, if you have nasty chlorine water, leave it in a wide bowl or whatever and let it off gas, and the taste will be greatly reduced in a few hours. Correct. And I believe you can speed that up by agitating the water, even as simply as pouring it back and forth between two containers, increases the surface area that interacts with the air, and it off gases the chlorine even faster. And that's why if you have like a pool, you can use a pool for emergency preparedness in most cases if you haven't done weird chemicals. But even most of the chemicals that you put in there, a few weeks, and that pool would start to get some green algae in there. That actually is a sign that the water has now become safer for you to drink. Meaning, not necessarily that it's safe for you to drink, it's probably contaminated with bacteria now. But as long as that is growing in there, it means that those chemicals that are in there that are preventing life have dissipated or off gassed. So then you could just run it through a normal filter, you could boil it, whatever. And that's why one of the reasons I really, really suggest having a sun oven or some sort of solar oven is for the capability that has for continuous long-term pasteurization of drinking water without having to use a bunch of your energy resources or even your filters. Because if you have water that's not chemically contaminated, all you're worrying about is biological contaminants, which is pretty much any water you would collect in the wild that hasn't been, said oil spills in or something, but like even rainwater that you're not drinking instantly, water that you've stored, water from your pool, water from anything that you collect out of rivers and lakes and streams. Every day you could just have a designated solar oven. Water only has to get to something like 180 degrees for a little while before it's pasteurized. So you just put, a gallon or two of water from fit in a sun oven in a pot or a metal container of some kind, and then it would be safe to drink every day. And you swap it out, and you would have a continuous flow of safe drinking water without having to wear out some of your filters, without having to use your propane, your wood, or your electric power sources or anything to boil water, which is pretty energy intensive. So that's actually probably the best use case for a sun oven, even more so than cooking. Where did I lost myself? Oh, here we go. Mark says in the sunlight too, even better. Yeah, the heat will expedite the off gassing as well. Usually, that's why a lot of times too, your pools will also the bacteria and the algae and stuff just grows better in the summer than the winter. But you have to use more chemicals in the summer for your pool. Jimmy says Grail is great for short-term serious emergency, but low volume filtration comparatively, but you can leave drink from a dirty puddle in the street. Right. And like I said, it's actually quick for the filtration process overall. You just push it through and then it's filtered. Whereas you have to actively pull through for the other one. But I do feel like that's just a better system because you don't have to like get on the ground in the middle of the airport and push this thing into it, which is what I was trying to avoid. But I would definitely have nothing bad to say about the Grail. I think it's just better for outdoor than for filtering like municipal water and stuff. Destiny says, plan on going to the local coin store for more gold in the morning. Huzzah! Let's get it. I really am bummed out about how little I can buy it right now. I just want it all. I've never been more sure about anything in my life. Let me put it that way. And we've already been proven right. What is gold at? 3,300 still? I haven't seen a single credible source saying that it's going to be down in 2, 3 years, 5 years. And it very likely could be 10K or whatever. It's just, this is the play, ladies and gentlemen. That's not financial advice. That is survival advice. We'll be harvesting first tomatoes of the year, turning color now. Awesome. I've learned that tomatoes are one of those things that are very easy to grow, very hard to grow well without having all the bugs, getting them nice and big and juicy. So they'll grow. It's going to be ugly, it'll be small, whatever. So there's a big gap between like just getting some kind of tomato produce and getting good, pest-free, big juicy ones. If I leave a bowl of water in my environment, Pacific Northwest, it will be green in no time. Yeah, for sure. Luckily, water is not in short supply in the Pacific Northwest. It's everywhere. It's basically a rainforest. I think it's literally a rainforest. As long as you're, Western and not in the desert of like Eastern Oregon and stuff. But the problem there is you're not going to get enough sun for a sun oven probably to really take effect. So you will need to either rely more on filters and energy to pasteurize / filter your water. Anywhere in the South, either east or west, you can use sun pasteurization. You get plenty of sunlight for the most part. Steve says, if we weren't just ignored by the government, they actively harm many low. Yeah. I've heard all these stories about them not only just not helping, but going out of their way to fuck with everybody, which is unfortunately not that surprising to me. SBQR says, I plant my fruit trees on the margins of my septic field and harvest the grass, top it, and use as fertilizer. Awesome. That is good system. What's up, South Florida? SU says they better wait because I'm off to South America for my next wife. Hell yeah. Those Colombianas, muy guapa. Star, son, you too. If I become a medieval farmer, would I have to get a hood and learn to play the lute? You wouldn't have to, but like the Bible says, whatever your hands finds to do it well. I think you'd want to go, full send. Why not? Livestock produce and stored grain will be all gone in a month if shit hit the fan. Probably true. Fish and game in another month, dogs and cats in another month, then cannibals. It just depends. Like I said, I'm not focused on um these massive shit demand scenarios. What they come up, we'll fight in the shade. We're gonna use our press to the best of our ability in that scenario. But I think that if anything, COVID had showed us that I think people are so bad at hunting. Like obviously there would be decimated supplies of fish and game in some areas, but they would just disappear. The ones that survived would be the ones that were really good at avoiding people. And there'd be so many people out in the woods stumbling around who didn't know what they were doing that it would probably be really hard to effectively hunt, people shooting each other and stuff. And people would die so quickly that I think after the first, you wouldn't be able to find anything for like a year. And then like 3 years later, it would be like the populations would be just absolutely exploded of all these animals. And well, like I said, one of the populations that would benefit the most in a major shit the fan scenario would be a lot of fisheries that are in like big, big lakes and the ocean. So if some Yahoo can't get it from the shore with a reel or a cast net, like the crab and tuna fish and all this other shit that they go out with these big commercial operations in massive, massive quantities every day. If those people weren't doing that, those populations would just explode. So if you're on some ocean or um, big lake or river, having some ability, some kind of boat that can go out there and with crab traps and netting and trawlers and stuff like that, you could probably have just a massive supply of food. Silver will easily go to 600. Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to. The only way I can think to put it is looking at gold and silver now. At the very least, I think the worst case scenario is that we'll be looking at it the way we looked at the way boomers could buy houses back in like the 60s through 80s. We're just like, yeah, you buy a house for 50 grand, great. That's the way people will be looking at gold and silver. But I think it'll be much more dramatic than that. I with what's going on with our currency and just how just absolute pedal to the metal headfirst into the brick wall, it looks like we're going to hit this thing economically. I don't see any scenario where this stuff doesn't 10x at least in terms of nominal value. The problem is that what does that nominal value mean? And that's, I think, one of the best ways to benefit from it is to try and have some kind of secured debt. If you could, mostly that's going to be real estate. But if you have any kind of low interest, I would borrow $20 million right now if I could do it at like a low percent interest rate, just because I know that this stuff is going to be double in a few years. As SU says, I've heard that silver BS for decades. If it ever does such a thing, gas will be $100 per gallon, and so will simple hammer. Well, yeah, exactly. So the best way, like I just said, to benefit from that is maybe to also have U.S. dollar denominated debt, which can't float. It doesn't have an adjustable rate interest, so it can't float as the dollar continues to lose its purchasing power, and you can get a pretty good realization of that loss of purchasing power in the dollar. Because while I do think the dollar amount of gold and silver will hugely go up, and there will be some, commensurate gain in purchasing power because the demand is going to increase dramatically. It won't be as dramatic as if there could easily be a Weimar Germany type situation where an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver is worth millions of dollars, but that won't buy you what millions of dollars will buy you right now because everything's just going to become so much more expensive. So, but if you can have things that are fixed debt, then 1 ounce of silver will be able to pay off $1 million worth of debt, which right now does still buy you a lot higher house. So that's why I have zero interest in paying any extra on my 2.5% mortgage, because I'm planning on being able to pay that off with probably a handful of silver. Maybe this bar one day will just be able to pay off my entire house. It would not surprise me at all. That Volcambi bar is rather nice, isn't it? It sure is, man. This is one of the ones I got from Cutlery Lover that he sold off to raise a little money. It's a sweet one. Yeah, silver isn't shortage in a sense. Like I said, it's all about demand. Where are them drill videos? Thank you, Spaghetti. No power, 1 minute, 15 minute. Yeah, I got to do that. I will. I'll try. I'm not going to give you any time frame because I don't want to be a liar, make a liar out of myself. But he's talking about I've been talking a lot about drills that you could do to actually respond to like a power outage or an evac scenario within a certain time frame. Like, what can you really do if I have to leave within a minute, within 15 minutes, within an hour, stuff like that. And staging and organizing gear is big important part of that. Eric, he says, Eric, I know you live in Florida. Why did you leave? It wasn't prepping related. Like I mentioned before, I just grew up in Florida, lived there my whole life. I knew I liked the Southwest and Vegas in particular. So it was just completely related to that. I knew I liked the area, the desert. And so I decided to move. All right. I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to. Appreciate it. Like I said, guys, keep in mind that sign up for the Patreon, any paid members, that the prizes for next month are the HS1 Schrade Old Timer Honing Steel, keeping your knives sharp. The K-Bar 5351 IFB Trail Point, brand new. And this kind of youth-sized medium. It basically fits someone my frame, but you'd have to be like 5'6", 5'7". And it's like a bush rag / ghillie suit, head, top, and pants, full coverage. So you could use this to chop up and build your own or your coverage as well. So those three are the prizes for Patreon. I'll put the link to that. We'll put the link to the Mira. I'll put the link to, oh, one more thing I wanted to cover real quick is because I've talked about this before, and it's just another instance of me proven right, is that when we've seen so much more now we see in these conflicts, a couple ways I've been proven right. For those of you who don't know, there was some kind of demonstration, Israel-Palestine thing in Colorado, and this dude is some fucking terrorist dude, Mohammed or whatever, was throwing Molotov cocktails at people, and they're still searching for a motive. And I don't give a shit about, like I've mentioned before, this is about there being multiple nations now in the US who are fighting with each other in our country over things that are happening in other countries, basically religious beefs going back thousands of years. And now we're dealing with the consequences of that. And so that's the one thing I've been always talking about. But more importantly, what we saw even going back from like the 2016 and January 6th type stuff and the George Floyd and all that is that people are increasingly using like fire as a weapon and something that you're likely to encounter in a lot of civil unrest scenarios. So I think it's incredibly important to have not just fire extinguishers in your car, a full size one, but anytime you have any sort of chest rig or like belt pack or something like that, some sort of small fire extinguisher like this, or at the very least, one of these blankets, which you could put inside a plate carrier pocket, a backpack. You could even put it in your cargo pocket if you have like cargo pants. Although I will say from experience, be very careful shoving stuff into your cargo pockets if you're ever planning to do any sort of a lot of walking, because that would, whatever's in there just rubs back and forth and will just chew you up. But these can just be thrown over somebody who's on fire and not supposed to reuse it, but it can be reused in an emergency because it's just a fiberglass. It doesn't burn, smothers it out. And so probably a combination of the two of these would be best, because the blanket you can't always use if it's someone who's or something that's on fire, maybe like inside of a vehicle or doorway or something like that. You might want some kind of spray. But fire, and just it's an easy thing for people to create as a weapon. Yeah, and a big pepper spray you'd keep in your car too. And I think that's becoming more and more important, especially as we see the increase in both not only stupid people doing stupid things for stupid reasons, but also an increase in people getting, bad legal outcomes and scrutiny and everything for defending themselves, like Daniel Penny. Like, and there's going to be plenty of situations where you feel like I really need to do something here, and there might be a bad legal outcome if I use lethal force, like a weapon, like a gun or a knife. Maybe a crowd of unarmed people beating it, like blocking the road, that sort of thing, where it's very, very unlikely for you to get serious legal trouble for pepper spraying someone. You might, I will not promise you that you won't get legal trouble or maybe an assault charge at worst, but you're not going to get a murder charge. You're not going to get attempted murder charge, that sort of thing, like you could if you have to use a gun or a knife. So that's it. Appreciate guys. Links to that stuff once in a few minutes will be in the description. It's not there now once it loads up. But I appreciate you guys watching. Stay safe out there.